Okay, reciprocal graphing. Okay, what is a reciprocal? Okay, so you've probably heard that word when you've been working with fractions. So if you have a fraction of 2/3, the reciprocal would be 3/2. Okay, does that ring a bell? Okay, so let's pick some numbers and find the reciprocal and see if we can find some patterns. Okay, so 3/5. The reciprocal would be 5/3. Okay, what if I do negative 2/3? Then the reciprocal would be negative 3/2. Okay, it doesn't change anything with the negative. If it's a negative number, it's still a negative. Positive, still positive. You're just flipping the value around. What about 7? That would become 1/7. What about negative 1/4? Then that would become negative 4. What about 1? Yep, that would stay 1 because 1/1 changes to 1/1. What about negative 1? That also doesn't change. What about 1,000? Then that would become 1/1000. What about 0? That's a tricky one because 1/0, what's the math rule about dividing by 0? It's undefined. You can't define that. Okay, so here's some things. Here's the keys. When you graph, when you see a graph, when you're going to graph the reciprocal. Okay, if your graph is equal to 0, you're going to draw an asymptote, which is an undefined line, vertical line. If your graph is 1 or negative 1, your new graph is going to stay at that point. If your graph is really big, it's going to turn small. So 1,000 became 1/1000. So if the bigger you are, the smaller you are. And if your graph is really small, then it's going to be big. It's going to have that opposite relationship, right? Okay? And then if your graph is negative, it stays negative. So just don't forget that, because I always get people who try to reflect it over the axis. Negative still stay negative, positive still stay positive. Okay? So I'm going to draw you a graph. I'm just going to draw you a line. So this is just a slope of 1. Okay. So the green is going to be my new graph. So this is f of x. And then we're going to draw 1/f of x, which means the reciprocal. Okay, so 0 is where I start. So here's where I see a height of 0. So now I'm going to draw an asymptote. Now I look for heights of 1 or negative 1. So that's a height of 1 and negative 1, and they stay there. Okay, and now I look for big, and I make it small. Okay, if this is big, it becomes small. So I can see that I'm going up like this, and then as I'm going from here to here on my graph, I'm getting closer and closer to 0, so I need to go away from 0. So if your graph is going away from 0, your reciprocal goes closer to 0, and vice versa. Okay, I don't ever cross this line because this is always positive, so this always needs to also stay positive. So as I'm going here, look at, I'm going to be at like a height of 10, so this is a height of 1/10. A height of 100, a height of 1/100th. So you're just getting closer and closer to the x-axis. Okay, so here you can see my graph from here to here is getting closer to 0, so I go away from 0. From here to here, my graph is getting away from 0, so I go closer to 0. Okay, I'm going to draw you another graph. Okay, let's go here. I'm going to draw, this is going to be a V and then up like that. Okay, so look for heights of 0. So here's a height of 0. Now I draw an asymptote. Height of 0, draw an asymptote. Okay, now I'm going to look for heights of 1 or -1, and then they stay. Stay. Okay, now I'm going to look for closer to 0 or away from 0 patterns. So from this point to my asymptote, I went closer to 0, so I go away from 0. From here to here, I'm going away, so now I go closer to 0. Okay, I can actually take this number, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So -7 becomes -1/7. Okay, so the further it is from 0 now, the closer it's going to be to 0. So this is the closest to 0 point, and then we go away from 0. So the closest to 0, and now away from 0. And that's my reciprocal graph. Okay, so again, recapping, if your graph and then your reciprocal, if your graph is 0, you draw an asymptote. If your graph is 1 or -1, you draw the same point. Closer to 0, you go away from 0. If you're away from 0, you go closer to 0. And that's the gist of it.